Fiore Baresi was the son of Constantine Baresi, a farmer who never made much in life. The farm was small, and it rested on the edge of a cliff along the Dolomites, a thin wooden fence, the only thing keeping their sheep inside. The place was also doubled as a vineyard. The wine had varying degrees of quality. "We may be poor," Constantine Baresi bemoaned, swigging a large cup of wine, "but our hearts live like the rich." He laughed quite a hearty laugh, enough so that the sleeping sheep of the evening sun awoke, and moaned loudly at the noise. Fiore Baresi did not understand what his father meant. He only saw the difference between the gold-laden merchants who controlled the heart of merchants and the dirtied, wine-smelling shack they lived in. Where Constantine saw a mansion, Fiore saw a shack. Where Constantine saw the world within, Fiore only saw beyond the mountains, dreaming of a way outside the sleepy old village. As he sat, tugging at his food, Fiore recalled a day where his uncle Alvis and his family visited from a land far away. In truth, not a day's walk from Merchant, came to visit. They came with a parade of servants, gifts, and an air of superiority. "It must be nice living out there," his cousin Lorenzo joked. "So much clarity up here, much freshness to be found, such simple joy." "It must be nice not to hear of the assassination," sighed his aunt, Rita. "It must be nice living here in Povertimolo." That was a small village they lived in, 1,000 times smaller than the gold-laced city of Merchant. Alvis then took a giant slug of wine. "My God, this is some fine wine you've got." "Made as the kings once ordered," Constantine claimed, then proceeding to go on a rant about how other wines were not as fine, nor canonically accurate as his. Fiore took a sip of the wine he had helped create. It only tasted of the same boring nothing. "It isn't that good," he claimed. "I bet the wine down at Merchant tastes 1,000 times better, like stars ground into sand and then mixed with the salt of the earth." At that, his cousins and their families laughed. "Say," Alvis began, placing a thick hand onto Fiore's shoulder, almost crushing it, "if you want to taste the wines down at Merchant, why don't you come down there? Work for me. I always need more men like you who really know how to tell the pure from impure. The taste of sweet, sweet—" "Ah!" Constantine injected, clapping his hands at that. "He would never want to leave Povertimolo. This place is filled with fine memories. Right, boy?" Fiore wondered what he should have responded. In the end, he just sat there. Constantine laughed it off, and so did the others. "That offer is always open," Alvis assured. "Surely you desire more in life than this junky old place." Fiore pushed the memory aside as he finished cleaning the table. He wondered if the offer still stood. It had been a few years from the visit, but the memory was still fresh in his mind. And so, as Fiore went off to sleep, he watched beyond the cliffs, and down below, the port city of Merchant, a place of vast riches and pure wines. Something in him told him that he should be there, indulging in the luxuries of more civilized life, away from the quite literal animals of Povertimero. The next morning, Constantine was out, bringing the sheep to a pasture in a small plateau, although he was not in the right state of mind, as he was still drunk from all the wine he drank the previous night. Fiore climbed up the mountain and went up to his father. "Papa," he called out, "I'm leaving today." "What?" Constantine questioned, confused, mind still foggy from the wine. The sheep he was herding threatened to escape. Fiore began walking back to the house and packed his bags. "Where are you going?" "To Merchant," he replied, stepping to the farmlands a final time. "To see my uncle Alvis." "Ah!" He clapped at that, not realizing what was going on. "Tell my good-for-nothing brother to come visit me sometime." Fiore sighed, turned, and walked away. He passed through the village, giving dirty looks to the villagers. He fed the dog that had always laid limp a final time, drank a cup of wine he himself had made, and passed beyond the village, and then down into the staircase of 1,000 steps, an ancient thing that was built by the ancestors of the Baresi clan, who sought out richness beyond their high farms and vineyards. He had heard stories of the place being haunted, and those same stories whisked in his mind like a fog of the early speaking serpentine tales into his ears. Nevertheless, he continued on, carrying a satchel and a bag. A fountain appeared on a small platform, and there he took his lunch, a tasty, sweet piece of bread and fresh, crystalline water from the fountain. From the fog, a voice, sharp yet sweet as honey, called out, "Spare any food for a poor and hungry old man?" And from the fog appeared an old, hunchbacked man, a cane carrying his weight, and an impossibly sized sack behind him. Trinkets and goods clicked and clacked as he walked close to Fiore. His eyes seemed crazed, and he drew all too close to Fiore, his long, itchy beard nearly caressing his face. "Spare any food for a hungry old man?" he asked, revealing teeth clattered, torn and stained as his clothes. Fiore wanted to push the man off the cliff, but something good inside him told him not to, naturally. He then broke his bread in 2 pieces and gave it to the man. "Thank you," groaned the man, sitting beside him and devouring it instantly. "I am but a merchant of the night, travelling these stairs in search to sell my goods." That was when Fiore realised the sun had set. Somehow it had passed from the afternoon and into the night. Had he slept at the fountain? Or had he woken up a bit too late? "A merchant, huh? You come from—" He gestured over to the city. "Merchant?" No, he mused, eating his bread. "I come from lands beyond the sea, far, far away, from a place unlike here nor there." He broke bread some more and continued to eat. "Have you been to Merchant?" the traveller nodded. "How's it like there?" "Wonderful. A place where one can make their riches. And speaking of that—" The strange man set down his oversized sack of goods and picked out a couple of items. "Would you be interested in some of mine?" They looked bizarre, spiritual, and had a starry glow to them he had never seen but in his father's eyes when he talked about the shack as a mansion. "What?" They dazzled like stars. "Are they?" And indeed, they seemed like it. Bits and pieces that shimmered just the way the skies did. "Ground from the heavens itself, made into sand and dutifully crafted. This one," he pointed to one of the incomprehensible objects, which turned into a clock, surprising Fiore, "has the power to make one old or young." The man turned it, transforming from a hunchbacked elder to a man who looked uncannily like himself. He continued, pointing to another, a compass, "and this one leads the owner to their true ambition, and others into a dreary fate." "Cursed items! Ungodly cursed items!" Fiore shouted, snapped out of his trance. "I'll have none of this!" "As you wish," the man replied, taking it all back into the folds of his sack. "Perhaps another time." "Never! These must be tricks of the devil! Get out of my sight!" "If you say so." And the merchant sprang up like a rabbit, handed Fiore back his broken bread, which amounted to more than the half he'd given, and danced off into the mist. Suddenly, the stars in the sky were gone. It was the afternoon. Fiore looked around in confusion. Had it been a dream? And yet, the bread he held was as real as the earth itself, a touch of starry skies outlining the pastry. "What in the name of God?" he murmured. He'd heard stories about the place, stories about the fountain now coming back to him. A fountain which fed on greed and ambition. Goosebumps grew on his skin, and he hurriedly finished his meal, stuffed the rest of the bread into his bag, and scampered off. By the time he had walked down 1,000 stairs, the sun had begun to set, and Merchant was as glorious as he had imagined it. The smell of baked goods and fine wines littered the air. Beautiful marble artifacts were housed in a little shop window, and nearby was a bazaar selling the finest clothes that he'd ever seen. He imagined himself in them and thought of all the girls who would fall in love with him. Fiore gasped in disbelief. The orange sun cast a magical glow upon the city, and he oohed and ahed as he roamed the place, from the bustling bazaar to the alleys where a street musician strummed the mandolin to his heart's content. He danced on the streets, happy at last. He found himself testing the glorious cheeses and fine dishes of the city, and he could only gasp in how delicious it tasted. But at last, he found himself at the door of a beautiful villa in a rather secluded part of Myuu. A wooden door, crafted by the gods themselves, displayed an engraved symbol, the symbol of the House of Beresi, marble and adorned with rubies, as how it should be. Not with wooden sheep dung, as the one his father had put up. With a tinge of nervousness, he knocked on the door. Shortly after, a maid opened the door. "Who are you, signor?" she asked. "I am Fiore Beresi," he introduced himself, "and I am here to see my uncle Alvis." He was then escorted to his uncle's study. There his uncle was, with a man who seemed the exact opposite of his fattened, gluttonous uncle. Lorenzo Beresi, his cousin, a fine-toned man who was the talk of the town. Even as a newcomer, he heard a lot about his cousin, a young man with a fierce gaze, an intuitive mind, and an aura that was perfect. Such were the ways of the rich and powerful.
"Fiore!"
his uncle boomed, walking slowly over to him and embracing him in an almost suffocating hug.
"What are you doing down here?"
"Well, I've been thinking about it," he began, picking his nails. "And I've been thinking about your offer, all those years ago."
"You've finally come to accept my offer."
So Alvis did remember.
"Finally grown tired of the same old things day by day."
"Guess so."
"Wonderful."
Alvis then turned to introduce his son.
"Lorenzo, show your cousin how things work around here."
He turned to the door and shouted for the servants. 2 servants came running in.
"Find him a place to stay and,"
he said, and then he sniffed the air in disgust.
"give him a bath and some freshly made clothes."
Fiore smiled. He would soon get to experience life in Myuu for himself. His dreams were finally coming true. All he had dreamt and wondered would be in reach. Lorenzo watched everything and wondered who exactly the newcomer was. He vaguely remembered going to an old shack and seeing someone that looked familiar. Yes, that was it. His uncle Constantine's son. But on the rare occasions his father brought up the subject of his brother, it had always been terrible things, mostly about how Constantine would never hand over their father's wine recipe, a thing that would have sent them into a world of riches, yet untold. He'd thought Fiore would face the fate of other unexpected guests, yelled at, kicked out, or taught a lesson. But instead, he was being invited to family dinner. "The war?" Rita began as she stuck a fork into a well-made lasagna. "The draft! Our son will be in danger!"
"Worry not,"
Alvis replied.
"I've got my money deep in the combat league's pocket."
The party was a precursor to what later became the National Fascist Party of Italy. "What war?" poor confused Fiore asked. The table laughed in unison, thinking it was a joke, a ploy of richness to show they could simply buy their way out. Wait, what war? And then they realised Fiore really didn't know anything about the war.
"Well, boy, the Great War,"
Alvis informed.
"Surely you've heard about it? Great bomber planes and the trenches?"
Fiore shook his head, but did recall seeing a few planes flying over his village.
"Ah, well, a bunch of things led to each other, and now everyone's involved."
Alvis chuckled.
"The King of Austria, was it, got killed, and now we're all fighting against everyone. Germany's doing really well. They're fighting the Britannicos and Russia and winning."
"But that's nothing to worry about. If those Britannicos try invading us," Lorenzo cut in, flexing his muscles, "I'll fight them off." The lady beside him swooned in affection. "Fiore, was it?" Rita inquired, having forgotten her nephew's name. Fiore nodded. "Nothing too much to worry about. We have the luxuries only money can buy." And so, assured, Fiore ate his dinner in peace. The others began to speak of politics, of deals and contracts. These things Fiore, no matter how hard he tried, was not able to understand. Then, just as he finished his first meal of risotto and a piping hot cappuccino full, Alvis ordered for the second course to be brought in, and then the third, and then dessert. Waiters were running up and down. It had been the most food Fiore had ever eaten. None rivaled its breadth and superior quality, and yet, to the others, it lacked quality.
"Servants!" Rita yelled. "Fetch me a napkin!" "Like peacock, you fools!" Lorenzo snapped. "Should have expected this."
At long last, Alvis finally spoke to him, just as their servants began to clear the table.
"Look here, boy. You'll do a fine job here. I've been needing a successor, and who better than my nephew?"
"Right," Fiore cheerily replied, and from there, Fiore went off to bed, to one of the smaller rooms in the mansion, though it seemed larger than the shack he'd come from. It, by all means, was richer than his previous home. The next day, he awoke to the sound of church bells ringing, the natural call of the morning emanating from the ancient church of Mashant.
"Lorenzo, Fiore!"
Alvis called, summoning them to the dining hall. Breakfast was being served, and the two found themselves there, alone. The others hadn't come. No. Been invited. "Good morning," Fiore, good-naturedly, greeted. Alvis waved back, mouth filled with delectable eggs. Lorenzo made no such greeting, instead opting to eat the hams that had been prepared.
"Listen here, boys,"
Alvis began, clearing his throat.
"I ought to teach you both about how this business works. Lorenzo, it's finally time for you to learn the trade of the great Baresi clans. Merchantry."
"I thought our trade was craftsmanship," Fiore asked, remembering the 1,000 steps he had journeyed the day before.
"Maybe long ago, but certainly not in this day and age,"
Alvis corrected.
"Fiore, you're going to want to know this if you have any dreams of living further than the old plot of land my good-for-nothing brother keeps. So I'll take you both out today to watch the work, right after breakfast."
"But Papa," Lorenzo protested, brow furrowing, "I was supposed to go horse-riding with Clemente."
"You need to learn the tools of the trade,"
interrupted his father. Breakfast was soon over, and the three soon were on the road, riding in a richly laden horse carriage, bringing textiles from Prato to be shipped over to America. They travelled the town, which seemed dull, sleepy, but found themselves at the harbour. Large, massive ships were docked there that Fiore had only heard tales about from travellers visiting his town. Alvis greeted the dock workers, a ramp was set up, and soon they found themselves on one of the larger boats. A young man appeared, rich and clearly the owner of the massive boat. "Signor Alvis Baresi!" he exclaimed, opening up his hands.
"Signor Apollo Crease!"
Alvis shouted back, and the two embraced in a great hug. Alvis turned to Fiore and Lorenzo, and spoke.
"Signor Crease here is a prime example of a merchant. He's rich, powerful, and travels the 7 seas. He comes from rich money, but always strives to earn more."
"Indeed I do," Apollo agreed. "And who might these two be?"
"Lorenzo, my son, and Fiore, my brother's son. I'm going to teach them the art of the merchant, and who better to do so than with you?"
"Wonderful. Let's head on down to my office and get to business, and then we can drink some of this absolutely fine ambrosia I secured from the Outlands." The group travelled below deck, and business was quickly brought up. Alvis expertly began to show off their goods. He explained and presented them all well, charismatic, almost perfect. In return, Creak showed off his goods from the land across the sea, America. And then they started to barter, and then to haggle, to make the most of it. Alvis instructed for the two to watch. Fiore did, intently, wanting to become rich one day. Lorenzo looked indifferent. Eventually, though, it concluded. Alvis sent the boys back to the carriage, carrying a great deal of goods and a list of more things he wanted to buy. Alvis stayed behind, ready for a day of catching up with his old friend. And that was how it worked. Day after day, Alvis would bring the boys to his current economic opportunity and show them how things went, signing contracts here, haggling there, instructing merchant underlings of new trade paths he'd heard of. Fiore swallowed it up with curiosity and excitement, asking all too many questions. And one cold winter day, Alvis decided to let them loose.
"Listen here, you two,"
he began, sitting them down for tea.
"I've decided that's enough of me showing you both how things work. It's time to set you two loose, and so I've designed a competition."
"Yes!" joyfully replied Fiore. He'd been wanting to try for a while.
"See, I've made myself a deal with the neighbours, the House of Toscani, and to make you both serious about it, whoever wins gets the hand of their eldest daughter, Sylvia."
Lorenzo's eyes lit up. It had been quite a while since he last saw Sylvia.
"The Toscanis are rich, richer than us, and they're looking for more wealth, just as how we are."
"So what's the competition?" Fiore asked.
"Simple money."
Alvis handed them a large sum of liras.
"By the end of this week, whoever can double that amount wins."
Fiore's jaw dropped. He had never seen such money before. Merchant was a small town, and Lorenzo was well known for causing some trouble when he was drunk. Fiore, on the other hand, was as a newcomer who'd come in to learn the ways of the merchant. And, truth be told, Fiore's confidence began to dwindle when he realised his reputation was simply not that good. And so began the competition, doubling the sum of gold they had been given. How exactly? They had no clue. How could he double liras? Money was spent, not earned, and it certainly didn't multiply. Investments, he quickly realised, and so he sought off to find quick and easy investments to double his worth. Lorenzo, on the other hand, strong-armed his way in. His reputation as the House of Baresi scared the lower classes, and he simply lied about a new tax his father needed, easily collecting the money. But still, the pennies given was nothing to the lump sum. Fiore wasn't doing that much better. Nobody trusted him, and twice he was scammed of his money. But the third time, he found himself simply working his way to the docks, where he encountered merchants. He had an idea now. He would spend some liras on goods, and then sell back the goods at a higher rate. An experiment of sorts he'd learned from watching his uncle. So he set aside some gold, bought what he needed, and sold. It was spices from India at first. He went door to door and weaved stories as his uncle did, and then he started to earn more money than from which he had started. A simple smile crept up as his earnings began to grow. He continued this strategy, day by day, even hiring others to help, until he had almost doubled his given amount by the end of the week. And, on the second to last day, Lorenzo emerged out of nowhere, flanked by two of his friends, and pinned Fiore to a wall in a dark and shadowy alleyway.
"What's your secret?"
he growled, foaming at the teeth.
"How do you double your liras? Devil's tricks."
Fiore was scared still. "I just followed as we were taught. I'm no devil."
"Nonsense!"
the other man scowled.
"A poor farmer's boy like you has no business even near a pile of gold."
And with that, he snatched away Fiore's earnings.
"Men, teach him a lesson. There can only be one man who gains the hand of Sylvia Toscani,"
Lorenzo ordered. And the two kicked and beat Fiore until the sun had set and the stars drifted into the sky. Fiore was left with nothing but dust, and then he began to cry. All his hopes and dreams had been lost, beaten by others richer than him. He wondered if he should just go back to being a farmer, back at the mountains, as that was seemingly his destiny. And so he decided to take one last walk around Merchant, all through the bustling bazaar, through the fancy houses, and then to the docks. He sat there for a while, contemplating his life. That was when a bright, small, starry ship emerged on the horizon, and on it was a man he'd met many months before, the travelling merchant who doubled his bread and offered him wares. "Ah!" the man called, waving as his small ship docked. He bounced out, cheerful, despite his age, and hunched back. "Fiore Baresi, we meet again." Fiore, confused, took a wary step back. "You know my name?" He merely chuckled. "Your reputation precedes you, and I know the trouble you have suffered here tonight, but I give you a final chance to make things right." "How do you do that? Devil trickery?"
I swear to you I am no devil, the merchant insisted, sitting down and unfolding his bags. Merely a merchant of the night, another man like you, wishing to make his life richer.
So what can I buy? And to that, the bizarre merchant laughed, and the starry pearls he set transformed into glorious objects. The merchant pulled out a sword from its sheath and explained,
This sword here bests any enemy in battle.
He then pointed to a pen.
This makes your words sound absolutely hypnotic.
The compass, Fiore remembered, since the third item morphed into the wondrous little tool he'd seen months before.
You remember?
The merchant exclaimed, clapping his hands together.
It leads its owner to their ambitions, and others to their doom. Do you want it?
How much does it cost? Fiore inquired, tears drying up.
Ah, nothing now.
The merchant handed it over.
But I will need a promise. Promise that I will have a successor, someone to continue the art of the night merchant. Perhaps someone like you, of your blood.
I would learn from you, Fiore decided. I accept the promise. And with that, the merchant retreated off into his vessel, leaving Fiore with the magic compass, alone. He returned to the Baresi manor then, slept soundly, and dreamt of riches untold. Lorenzo laughed in his face when Fiore exited the house, following the compass and looking for destiny. And then, as if to rub in yesterday's beating once more,
That compass looks too expensive for you,
he mocked, stealing the compass.
It must be one of Papa's. We can't have a poor one like you stealing these things.
But Fiore only sighed and left the house. Lorenzo looked at the odd compass and wondered why it wasn't pointing north. Words seemed to appear on its thin glass, words that hypnotized the lax sun. He followed the compass, entranced by its words, and suddenly found himself at a construction site.
My God!
A worker shouted, pointing at the very centre of the dig.
Is that gold? Gold? Where?
Lorenzo shrieked, running over. The compass pointed in the direction of the site, and he saw it and ran over to seize it for himself.
Wait, no!
Shouted the worker. But his warning was too late, and Lorenzo found himself sinking into the earth, screaming for help. The two workers on site ran to get help, and Fiore emerged, watching it all happen. So he was right after all, Fiore murmured, thanking the merchant. The compass, which Lorenzo had dropped, was now back in Fiore's hands, safe and sound.
Help me!
He screamed, but Lorenzo's cries weren't heard. Fiore only gave him a knowing look before walking away, following the compass to make double the gold, from nothing. That was the last time anyone saw Lorenzo alive. His body was recovered, but by then, it was far too late. A day or so after Lorenzo's funeral, Alvise went to speak with Fiore.
I guess you win,
Alvise muttered.
Never liked that boy anyway. Never appreciated the true art of the merchant, always off with his ladies.
The portly old man then paused and thought a while longer before continuing.
Fiore, I've decided you will be my son now. You are a true merchant.
Thank you, Papa. Sylvia was the most beautiful woman that he had seen in his entire life. From the flowing waves of her chestnut hair to the soft curve of her full, rosy lips. And what was more, Fiore and Sylvia got along well and were married within less than a month of meeting. Life was good from then on. Money came pouring in, all with the help of the magic compass. Sylvia often asked what it was, but Fiore only told her it was merely a lucky charm he'd grown accustomed to. His profits grew as their unborn child grew as well. The ongoing war was no issue. Money brought in the rights and power he needed. Life went well. The compass, though, had a tendency to swindle people. It discovered items and deals others had dedicated their entire lives to. Fiore complained of this in private to Alvise, gently excluding the magic compass.
Such is the price of business,
Alvise only stated.
A merchant's life is a life of risks and reward.
And that was that. His child was born soon after, and he named him Constantine, after his father he'd left so long ago. On one starless night, Fiore awoke to a knock on his newly built mansion. He ordered the servants, heading to dismiss the intruder. Something within him knew the night merchant had come to collect his dues. "You have come," he greeted, opening the door and then stepping back in puzzlement. There was no merchant, but a deer this time, a fanged deer that seemed almost decayed in the moonlight. "I have come." The decayed doe was suddenly something else, a white lion of the savannah. Finally, though, it settled on a young man. "And I am ready," Fiore accepted, stepping out. "I will succeed you. Teach me the ways of your profession." "It is not you that I want." The night merchant looked deeper into the house. "Then who? Our deal was for a successor to be of your bloodline, and I have chosen little Constantine." "Nonsense!" hissed Fiore. "You can have the compass back if you want. I'll go with you, or the compass." "I will return when the sun rises to collect my reward," the merchant insisted, shape changing into the old, hunchbacked man. "No!" Fiore snarled. "Guards!" And the guards appeared, escorting the merchant away. "Guard the perimeter. Nobody goes in or out." With that, Fiore settled back off to sleep. The next morning, he awoke to a knock on the door. It was none other than the whimsical old man. "I have come." "Guards!" And nobody came. Fiore gingerly looked out, and where they had been the night before, there were only statues. Stone men with guns raised, frozen in place, heroic looks on their faces. "Give me my prize." The night merchant extended a hand. "Never! I'd rather return my wealth than give up my son," Fiore argued. A smile crept on the merchant's face. "I will give you 2 days. Return your money to Merchant, or I claim my prize." With that, the night merchant returned to the shadows he came from. Fiore didn't believe the words of the strange man. So that night, he set up his guards once more. He paid a visit to the local magician's shop, where he hired the best sorcerers and talismans money could buy. The next morning, a knock came on the door, and the men he had hired the day before were gone. In their place were birds, all sitting softly on the ground. "All right, I'll return the money." The merchant only nodded at this. Fiore went around the city and donated his gold, returning the money he'd seized with a compass back into the heart of the people. An old man he'd extorted was given 2-fold his money back. A couple he gave land back. To the alleyways he sent contracts to improve them greatly. The compass guided him to the people he had swindled so that he could give the money back. And to the men he'd invested in, he gave more. Not all the compass dealt with malice. Most, in fact, were good. His stocks, goods, sold and donated back to the public. "You have done well," spoke the merchant, appearing at his door a final time. Fiore gave the compass back. "You are truly a man who learns. Kind-hearted. Good." "Is this it then? Will I return to a life of poverty?" Fiore questioned. "No," the merchant denied. "You will have the skills you learned. The compass only leads you to the place you want. But to truly get there, you need to seize it yourself. The old thing doesn't really do much." "You're saying it was all me?" Fiore inquired, confused. "All the deals, yes. Lorenzo too. The compass led him into a trap, but he made the decision to run after the gold." The merchant sighed. "No successor for an old man. Oh well." "My money's all gone," murmured Fiore. "What do I do now?" "I suggest you return home. All these years you've forgotten where you came from, so use those skills and tend to the vineyard your father grows. Mighty good wine there, if I may add. Use the skills Alvis has taught you." And with that, the merchant walked off, leaving Fiore alone with his family. "Who was that?" Sylvia asked, confused. "Why have we been giving money away?" "Because," Fiore decided, "it is time to go home." And the next day, Fiore and his family trekked up the 1,000 steps, finally returning to Povetti Meadow at last. Fiore's father was looking after the sheep, but as soon as he saw his son, accompanied by his wife and his grandson, he leapt up in joy. Fiore ran over and embraced his father, having not seen him for a whole year. He introduced him to Sylvia and little Constantine, and told stories of the sights he'd seen and the places he'd travelled, stories of the night merchant and why he returned.
"Hush now,"
Father Constantine said, pouring a glass of family wine.
"Drink this instead."
Fiore drank the glass, and for the first time, it tasted glorious. Perfect. Superior. Starry. He had skills now, and vineyards that needed tending, untold riches that could be bought with what he'd learned. "I think," he began, looking out to the field of vines. He remembered how his uncle had wanted the recipe for himself, to grow rich with it. "This can lead us to untold riches."